upcoming exhibition at the Royal Academy raised a few eyebrows early this month when the advert for the new Entangled Past display included a trigger warning for themes of slavery, racism, historical racial language and imagery. The Academy now seems to have gone one step further. In the catalogue for the new exhibition, they have sensationally exposed one of their own distinguished academicians, John Singleton Copley, as a slave owner. Copley was an American artist who owned 3 slaves. He also married the daughter of a senior official in the East India Company. Painter Sir Joshua Reynolds did not escape the Royal Academy's wrath either, as he, and I quote, benefited from the labour of a servant of African heritage and, quote, profited from the patronage of enslavers, plantation owners and those involved in the West Indian trade. Well, joining me now is a friend of the programme, the filmmaker and activist Femi Nylander. Femi, thank you for coming in. We both agree that it's interesting to know about the history of the nation, but are they getting the perspective right, that actually in the 18th century the slave trade was going on, in the 19th century the British stopped it? Is dwelling on what people did in the past and criticising them for things that everyone else was doing a reasonable way of looking at history?
I don't think it's true to say that everyone else in the UK owned a slave. I think it's true to say that the UK as a whole probably benefited from the slave trade and still benefits to this day, historically, from the wealth it's gained from that. But I don't think it's true to say that every individual in the UK literally owned other human beings.
No, but slavery... No, they didn't. Indeed, the English law on the Mansfield judgment makes it clear that slavery in English law is not allowed, but that slavery is a global phenomenon, not a British phenomenon, and slavery goes on in parts of the world long after the British have abolished it.
You just had another guest on talking about homophobia. Homophobia is a global phenomenon. However, they were insinuating that some countries had slightly worse homophobia than other countries. There are homophobic people in Britain, there are homophobic people in Pakistan. They were making certain insinuations. I would very happily make the insinuation that slavery is a global phenomenon. However, the British, for a very long time, were world leaders in slavery.
But that's not true. The Portuguese transported far more slaves than the UK did, as did the Ottoman Empire. It's just not factually accurate.
World leaders, as in one of the world... Europe as a whole were world leaders, yes, but Britain...
The Portuguese did much more. In the Ottoman Empire,
the British actually helped to facilitate both the Spanish and the Portuguese in transporting slaves.
We actually stopped them. Look at what Palmerston was saying in the 1830s to Portugal as our closest, oldest ally, and was willing to break off relations with Portugal and defend the United States in an effort to stop slavery. That is what the British did.
Regardless of within... So if I have a bunch of friends and we're all out there robbing and raping and thieving, and we do it for 400 years, because we're vampires, we do it a very long time. We do it for a very long time, and we kill a lot of people, we rape a lot of people, and then at the end of it, I say to them, let's stop this. In fact, I'm going to help you guys stop this. Does that wipe away the fact that I have done that for 400 years? Britain was a world leader in the slave trade.
Who is selling us these slaves?
Where
are they coming from?
Britannia, rule the waves, Britons never will be slaves. That refers to the idea of Britons ruling the waves, leading the slave trade. Britain and the children of Britain.
That is not an anthem for the slave trade. That's an anthem for freedom.
No.
And the slaves are sold to the slave traders in the countries in which they originate. When Gordon is out in Khartoum, why is he there? He's there to stop Sudanese slave traders.
Very interesting. This is a very interesting point. The point that people always say, oh, well, look, Africans sold their own people. Africans sold their own people. You're always going to have some collaborators in oppressed people. Even today, whilst British companies pillage Africa, you have some people on the ground collaborating.
They're selling them to each other long before the British get involved.
At a much smaller scale and without the racialised...
No, there is a huge scale of slave trading going on before.
Much smaller
within
scale.
Africa.
You know your history.
And I do, and it continues.
So how many millions of slaves were...
Slavery continues in Africa.
How many millions of slaves?
After the British have tried to stop it. And we continue with this effort. We were talking about this on the programme last week.
Slavery continues in Africa today by the British.
By the British?
By British companies working in places like the Congo today.
The British have
utilising conflict mines, utilising conflict minerals. British companies, I encourage you, Jacob, to go and read a report by a company called War on Want, which talks about how London Stock Exchange listed companies are heavily, heavily, heavily invested in mining activities across the African continent which exploit child labor. They're heavily invested in chocolate companies which basically force kids
These are independent sovereign nations. If we started telling African countries how to run themselves, you'd be the first to say that this is imperialism.
You know the history of structural adjustment loans, where countries like Britain and France, through the IMF, basically put very, very stringent conditions on the behaviour of developing countries and force them into certain parts of behaviour by saying, you have debt to us, but that debt to us, so they owe, again, we spoke about this last time.
They wanted to borrow the money.
They wanted to borrow the money because they were dirt poor after years of pillage by the UK.
They wanted
by
economic
France.
advancement.
No, because all of their wealth was here. They have been pillaged. We're talking a few years after they stopped being colonies of the UK and France and Portugal. They then are offered loans by the same countries which have their jewels, which have their wealth, which have their
we were
minerals.
discussing the jewels in Ghana last week. They were taken
They've been lent back. They haven't even been given back. Britain hasn't given them back to Ghana yet.
Why were they taken?
They've stolen them.
But who are they taken from?
They've stolen them and then they've lent them back.
Who are they taken
Imagine.
Hold on.
I'll lend it back to you. I'll lend it back. I'm not giving you a drink back, Jacob, but I'll lend it back to you. How can you steal something and then lend it back?
From slave traders when we were trying to stop slavery.
So why were they not given back to the Ghanaian people?
They didn't belong to the Ghanaian people. They
still belong to Britain. They've been lended. They haven't even been given back to Ghana now.
They belonged to a particular tribe which was slave trading.
So why hasn't Britain given them back, Jacob?
Because we were there to stop the slave trade.
Why do we still own them? Why are we lending them their own belongings?
They attacked the British to maintain the slave trade.
This is just cognitive dissonance.
But a moment ago you were against the slave trade.
Now
what
you're
backing slave traders.
You're saying that Britain...
You are now backing slave traders.
You're saying that Britain stole Ghanaian items in order to fight slave trade.
We were attacked by them when we were there because they wanted to continue the slave trade, which we were trying to stop.
Who was the first independence leader of Ghana?
I don't know who the first independence...
You don't know anything about Ghanaian history.
This is pre the foundation of Ghana.
You've been told something by a guest on one of your shows, and
this is accurate history. You can look it up. You can look it up. You can look up the wars that took place.
No, I mean, apart from what's the reference?
You can look this up.
Tell me where to
look it up on Wikipedia, and you'll find out in 3 minutes.
That's a great source.
Thank you, Femi.